NASA never returned to the moon. Welcome to React with Q, and you know what we do. Let's go ahead and dive on into this reaction.
The summer of 1969 was an eventful one. It was a season of good and bad. Saran was convicted of murdering New York Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The last episode of Star Trek aired. The Beatles snatched the top song on Billboard's list. President Nixon pulled out 25,000 U.S. troops from Vietnam. The Manson murders happened, and a hurricane claimed the lives of more than 250 people. These are only a few of the most historic and memorable moments of that year. An unforgettable summer indeed, but the zenith of the summer of '69 was perhaps the Apollo 11 mission. On May 18th, the Apollo 10 mission was launched. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration commenced the mission in preparation for Apollo 11, another attempt by the United States to step on the moon. And on July 20th, 1969, Mission Commander Neil Armstrong and crewmate Buzz Aldrin became the first and second astronauts to step on the moon. With the success of the Apollo 11 mission, it was expected that NASA would once again launch another moon landing project. And yet, it never happened. Behind the historic event and all the glory are setbacks that could have easily ended the mission.
Yeah, I never understood that. Why in the world did we never go back to the moon if we did it beforehand? I mean, I know that there was some certain times where they tried, if I'm not mistaken. Let me know my inaccuracies, because I'm really only basing it off of like pop culture references. But I really thought that we've attempted it multiple times and it just never worked out. I think either like the ship exploded or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but let's dive in. Let's see what they're gonna say.
Prematurely, or ended the mission disastrously. It turns out that there are several reasons why we haven't pursued going back to the moon. Let's dive into the little-known details of the famous moon landing and figure out the reasons why we haven't launched another moon mission. From the takeoff to the aftermath, here are 15 secrets about the Apollo 11 moon landing. Number 15. The Apollo 11 was an impressive feat itself. The Apollo 11 mission was the cultivation of hard work and hope of hundreds of thousands of people. Armstrong himself acknowledged that. To this day, the spacecraft that took part in the mission remained to be the greatest engineering feat in the history of mankind. In the 20th century, engineers started to plan and construct a ship that could break through our planet's atmosphere, reach the moon, and return back to our planet. They needed a ship that would keep the crew alive throughout a return trip to the moon.
That's another thing. All the technology that we have now, you would think that we would be able to have the ability, the hardware, the manufacturing, the capabilities to create a ship strong enough to make that trip again. That doesn't add up. I wonder why we haven't done that yet.
Engineers and experts started from scratch. It took more than 8 years and $2.4 billion for the Apollo 11 to be accomplished.
Sheesh.
In today's money, that amounts to a little over $23 billion. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell right now. Number 14. President Kennedy never cared about the moon. When President John F. Kennedy kicked off the mission in 1961 and announced that the United States would go to the moon, he made an audacious statement. After all, no one in the early 1960s expected that NASA would be able to construct a magnificent spacecraft capable of taking on the impossible mission of sending men to the moon. And yet, thousands of workers spent their time and effort to make it happen. When Kennedy announced that he wanted the United States to be the very first to reach the moon and that he wanted to make it happen before the end of the 1960s, NASA had nothing. It had no rockets, computers, spaceships, or even spacesuits. But they made it work, and they completed the mission right on time. But did you know that President Kennedy never cared about the moon? No, the ex-president's interest lay elsewhere. Kennedy wanted to beat the Soviets into reaching the moon first. More than 5 decades after the moon landing, secret documents revealed the real reason why Kennedy pushed NASA to do the unthinkable. At the time, the Soviet Union was taking the lead in space exploration. They were seen as the pioneers after sending cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into space, and he became the first man to go to space. Kennedy didn't push for the project in the name of science or for something novel like gathering knowledge about the universe. According to the curator of the Smithsonian's Apollo collection, Teasel Muir-Harmony, Kennedy pushed for the project to demonstrate what the American industry was capable of doing. The higher-ups were motivated by political gains more than anything else at the time. But in the
I think that's pretty understood, especially when I just realized I found out that Abraham Lincoln didn't care about the slaves. It was to push a specific agenda, and it just so happened that ending slavery allowed that agenda to get pursued further. So yeah, these people don't care about us. Their only goal is to look as good as they can while they're in the office that they're holding, which is why I don't dabble in politics at all. I do not fool with that stuff.
end, President Kennedy's ambition became one of the most impressive feats of mankind. Number 13. The Soviets tried to hide their attempt to go to the moon. In the 1960s, reaching the moon was a race between the Soviet Union and the United States. However, the Soviets denied their efforts to go to the moon until 1989. The United States announced its intention to go to the moon through Kennedy's speech, but the Soviet Union never made their goals public. Instead, the Soviets worked secretly on their own program and continued on even after Apollo 11 reached the moon on July 20th, 1969. Some people think that perhaps the Soviets didn't want to admit that they were beaten by claiming that they never participated in the moon race to begin with. Now, have you ever wondered where all the conspiracy theories about the moon landing being faked came from? The space race was one of the reasons why some people think that the moon landing was faked. Conspiracy theorists started to convince people that the moon landing never happened and that NASA staged the entire thing to beat the Soviets. However, rest easy because all these claims were debunked. The moon landing is very much real, and if you ever get the chance to step foot on the moon, you would surely see traces of past moon missions up there. Number 12. No insurance company accepted the astronauts. Most of us have insurance. It's always good to prepare for the worst.
Nationwide was not on their side.
Usually, it's not that hard to apply for, but Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were quite different. You see, no insurance company would take you up as a client, especially if you're bound to be sent to the moon on a blasting spaceship. A lot commended their courage to embark on a space mission, but most of the insurance companies were sure they would suffer a huge loss if they made a deal with any of the astronauts. In short, they believed that they would not be returning from the mission. No one wanted to offer life insurance to the astronauts, so the three decided to be creative. The astronauts knew that there was a demand for their signatures. Online selling and auctions didn't exist back then, but they knew that regardless of their safety, their signatures would cost a lot of money. A month before Apollo 11 was set to be commenced, the three astronauts were quarantined, and they spent their time signing hundreds of covers. It was their own way of life insurance. Their postmarked autographs were supposed to be sold by their families should something happen to them in space. In the end, the Apollo 11 mission was a success. The three astronauts came home safely, and the autographs they left behind still gave enough funds to their family. Today, a single insurance autograph can cost as much as a whopping $30,000. Number 11.
Wow.
Spacesuits were created by a lingerie company. Everything used in the Apollo 11 mission is hailed as an engineering marvel. So many people are often stumped upon hearing that the spacesuits that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin wore during the moon landing were made by a lingerie company. Yes, you heard that right.
Victoria's
Armstrong
Secret
was wearing a custom-made spacesuit, model A7L, serial number 056, during the mission. At the time, it cost around $100,000, and in today's money, that would be more than $670,000. They didn't cut costs on the spacesuit. It was meant to protect the astronauts from the lunar temperature, which goes from a scorching 240 Fahrenheit in sunlight to a freezing minus 280 Fahrenheit in the shadows. This suit was also meant to shield them from solar ultraviolet radiation, which could be lethal to man. There was no room for error in the creation of the spacesuit, and even a small error in the stitching would cause it to be rejected. It was quite easy to make something that could withstand extreme temperatures and shield the astronauts from micrometeors, but the biggest challenge was making something that was flexible. The spacesuit makers were tasked to create a durable suit, but that could still give the astronauts flexibility and nimbleness. The astronauts needed to climb, bend, twist, and move their arms comfortably.
That is actually really amazing.
The International Latex Corps.
Because sometimes you're so used to seeing astronauts walking very stiff. And I mean, to be honest, I mean, when you think about flexibility, sometimes I think about the opportunity for a crack to happen, you know, or some type of give to the material. So for the fact that the material was able to be intact and it was flexible for them is nothing but short of genius. Like, kudos. See, no one even says that. No one says kudos to the individuals who made the actual suits. Shout out to anyone who actually put their name or put their stamp or their efforts into creating these suits, because without you guys and or ladies, there would be no NASA, there would be no space missions, there would be no Neil Armstrong, you know. So man, that's real cool. And I hope that you're all enjoying this. This is really interesting.
Dover, Delaware was the suit's creator, but the one that figured out how to solve the problem of flexibility was Playtex, a famous maker of bras and girdles in the 50s and 60s. Who knew that creators of female undergarments would solve the dilemma of a flexible space suit? Number 10. Astronauts trained rigorously. The making of all the tech needed to reach the moon wasn't the only daunting part of the Apollo 11 mission. The astronauts tasked to step foot on the moon also underwent extreme preparation. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins all underwent trips nationally and internationally to prepare their bodies for entering space. They trained in several sites, including Arizona, Texas, and Nevada. The astronauts trained and practiced collecting and analyzing rock and soil samples until it became muscle memory. They dug trenches, drove core tubes into the soil, and did other training to make sure they would be able to collect samples properly. However, the most challenging thing was to undergo the G-force training. They needed to maneuver themselves in zero gravity, and they needed to be able to do everything from moving from one place to another to planting a flag. Astronauts were suspended sideways, and they were tasked to walk along a wall to imitate the lower gravitational pull of the moon. Number 9. The Saturn V rocket almost exploded. Saturn V is a retired American super heavy-lift launch vehicle created by NASA. It was the one that launched Apollo 11 during its takeoff. However, NASA officials feared that it would blow up the spectators around the area because of an incident in 1968. At the time, Apollo 6 was launched as a test flight, and the massive rocket almost broke apart. In 1965, two engineers claimed that if an explosion ever occurred, it would create a massive fireball that was about 1,400 feet wide, with temperatures of up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Sheesh.
A lot of people gathered around the rocket in the Apollo 11 liftoff, but NASA still decided to take a few precautions. Most of the VIP guests were sealed 3.5 miles away from the pad during the liftoff, just in case something happened. Fortunately, Saturn V stayed strong, and none of the spectators around the perimeter were harmed. To this day, the mighty Saturn V is still the largest and most powerful rocket to complete its assigned mission without any deaths or problems.
Dang.
Number 8.
Wow, this is some really, really good information. Like, goodness, I didn't realize how amazing space was, but I also think that it's super cool to understand that there is so many safety precautions that are necessary.
Armstrong was too good of a pilot. After the
Why is that a
liftoff,
bad problem?
the success of the mission mostly relied on Neil Armstrong's capability. Before he was involved in the mission, Armstrong was a naval aviator, engineer, and test pilot. He was often commended for his piloting skills, and even Buzz Aldrin hails him as the best pilot he has ever known. However, did you know that Armstrong's perfectly piloting skills almost endangered him and his companion? NASA tried to pinpoint the exact landing location of the Eagle in the Sea of Tranquility, a section of the moon. But upon reaching the spot, there was a massive crater on the landing site. Armstrong decided to manually navigate until he found a suitable place to land, and he did so incredibly smoothly. In fact, it was so smooth that the Eagle landed too softly. The lander's legs were supposed to break off and crumple after absorbing the shock of the landing, but Armstrong was so good of a pilot that it didn't break. That's why instead of taking a step, the astronauts took a leap because the exit was higher than expected. The soft landing wasn't a problem, but the small miscalculation on where the Eagle would land cost them fuel. Fortunately, Armstrong knew they had enough fuel to land somewhere safely and make it back. Number 7.
Wow.
The moon had a smell. Have you ever wondered what the moon smells like? Well, according to Armstrong and Aldrin, it smelled like wet ashes and gunpowder. Upon reaching the moon, the two had a lot of uncertainties.
How do you smell?
And upon smelling lunar dust, they feared that it was flammable. They were ready to make preparations in case the lunar material caught on fire after making contact with oxygen. But fortunately, it didn't. However, the two astronauts claimed that the moon dust smelled so strongly, it was also irritating. so much so that the smell clung to the astronauts. Unfortunately, scientists on Earth never got the chance to smell lunar dust because the smell dissipated on its way to our planet.
Wow.
Number 6. Buzz Aldrin took communion on the moon. Now, this is definitely one of the things that NASA most likely tried to keep under wraps. To this day, not a lot of people are aware of Aldrin's hushed-up communion on the moon. There was no other reason besides the fact that the Christian ceremony might garner unwanted attention and scrutiny from the public. Buzz Aldrin wasn't the first person to ever pray in space, but he was the very first, and most likely last, to take part in the first Christian sacrament on the moon. He did the unthinkable.
That is so amazing.
He took sacred bread and wine blessed on Earth and performed the Holy Communion on the moon. Aldrin did it while preparing to walk out of the spacecraft and be the second person to walk on the moon.
Buzz Aldrin.
As Aldrin requested for a few moments of silence,
amazing.
And for the listeners on ground control to give thanks in their own way, Armstrong watched quietly and did not participate. NASA kept the entire thing mostly a secret in fear that it would cause the same incident as what happened on the Apollo 8 mission, when NASA was sued after astronauts read a passage from the book of Genesis. In time, it seems like many began to respect Aldrin's decision. At the end of the day, we're all living on the same Earth, looking at the same moon, and blessed by the same sun. No matter what you believe in, it doesn't change the fact that we're all humans. Number 5.
Come on, Buzz. That's so amazing.
The iconic line of Armstrong might have been a misquote. As a part of a historic event, the first thing that Neil Armstrong uttered on top of lunar soil became one of the most iconic lines in history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Armstrong claimed as he made the first step on the moon. At least, that was what watchers on Earth heard. According to Armstrong, he said something a bit different. Instead of the famous quote, he said, "That's one small step for a man." It's a tiny misquote, and it's not that big of a deal. But it's true that there is a misquote. It's just that the footage people saw didn't clearly pick up the exact words that Armstrong said on the moon. It doesn't really matter what he said, but Armstrong wanted to make sure that he got his grammar right by including the indefinite article. However, the audio recording proved otherwise. After a while, even Armstrong himself started to doubt what he actually said. Fortunately, in 2006, a computer programmer named Peter Shanford analyzed the recording. He found out that there was a brief and unintelligible sound between the words "for" and "man." So I guess in the end, Neil Armstrong said the statement correctly. And now it's time for today's topic. This is why NASA never returned to the moon. Years after the Apollo 11 mission, UFOologists and conspiracy theorists on the internet claimed that NASA took more from the moon than just lunar dust and space rocks. They claim that the administration also recovered the remains of an alien, which they continue to hide to this day. More than 5 decades after the moon landing, we still haven't found life on our satellite. But many believe that the higher-ups know something that we don't. Do you believe that there really is life on the moon?
No.
Or is this nothing but another hoax? As always, comment down below with the hashtag today's
They want you to believe that type of stuff.
And let us know your opinion about what we...
But overall, that was such a good video. I feel like I learned a lot of stuff. Hopefully you all learned a lot as well. Man, space is amazing. I think space is one of those topics that will be definitely shown a lot on this channel. I really am fascinated by all things astrology. I just think that that's so cool. I think that understanding about the world above us is such an interesting thing. And I think it's important for us to understand the history of what it took for us to get out here. And as I continue to keep growing this channel, my goal is to keep spreading this awareness of education. I really want to promote that. That's super important to me. I want to make sure that my viewers and the people who want to watch my stuff, that they get something from it, that they can learn something, that they have a specific takeaway. But I appreciate you chilling with me. Thank you so much for your time. Hey, y'all have a good one. I'll catch you on the next video.